I used to believe that loyalty was the most valuable thing a person could have. Back then, I had no reason to think otherwise. My name is Olivia Carter, and 5 years ago, I was living the life I had always dreamed of. At 29, I was the founder and CEO of a fast-growing marketing company called Brightwave Media. I had started it from my tiny apartment with nothing but an old laptop, a secondhand desk, and a determination that bordered on obsession. For years, I worked 7 days a week. While my friends were going on holidays, I was pitching clients. While everyone else was sleeping, I was answering emails at 2 in the morning. Every success came with a sacrifice. But eventually, the sacrifices started paying off. We landed bigger clients, our revenue grew, we hired more employees. Within 4 years, Brightwave had become one of the fastest growing agencies in the city, and through it all, one person stood beside me. My best friend, Rachel. Rachel and I had met in university. She was funny, confident, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. When I launched Brightwave, she was the first person I hired. Over the years, she became more than an employee. She became my right hand, the person I trusted most in the world. If someone had asked me back then whether Rachel would ever betray me, I would have laughed. I trusted her with everything. Unfortunately, that would become the biggest mistake of my life. At the time, though, I couldn't see it. I only saw the friend who had celebrated every milestone beside me, the friend who knew all my secrets, the friend I considered family. And then there was Daniel, the man I thought I was going to marry. I met him at a charity event hosted by one of our clients. Unlike most people in business, Daniel didn't seem impressed by money or status. He was easy to talk to, kind, patient, the kind of person who made every room feel calmer simply by walking into it. After our first date, we talked for hours. After our second, I knew I wanted more. A year later, we were living together. 2 years later, he proposed. I still remember the night he got down on one knee. I cried before I could even answer. Of course I said yes. I thought my future was finally falling into place. A successful business, a best friend I trusted, a fiancé I loved. Everything I'd spent years building seemed stronger than ever. Looking back now, I realized something chilling. The people who destroy your life rarely arrive as enemies. They arrive as the people you trust the most, but I didn't know that yet. A few months after my engagement, Brightwave received an offer that changed everything. A major investment firm wanted to invest millions into the company. It was the opportunity I had spent years working toward. The deal would allow us to expand nationally. It would make us bigger than I had ever imagined. When the email arrived, I ran straight into Rachel's office. "We did it," I said, practically shouting. She jumped out of her chair. "We actually did it." I nodded. "We're meeting them next week." Rachel hugged me tightly. For a moment, she seemed just as excited as I was. At least that's what I thought. Now, when I replay that memory in my mind, I notice things I missed before. The way her smile disappeared a little too quickly, the strange look in her eyes, the hesitation. At the time, I ignored it. I was too busy celebrating, too busy planning for the future, too busy believing that the people closest to me wanted the best for me. I had no idea that behind closed doors, my best friend and my fiancé were already keeping secrets, secrets that would cost me everything. And by the time I discovered the truth, it would be far too late to stop them. If someone had asked me when the betrayal began, I wouldn't have been able to answer, because betrayal doesn't usually happen all at once. It starts with little things, things that seem harmless, things you explain away because you trust the people involved. A few weeks after the investment offer arrived, I started noticing changes in Rachel. At first, it was small. She became more involved in meetings she normally wouldn't attend. She asked more questions about company finances. She wanted access to documents she had never shown interest in before. When I asked why, she always had an answer ready. "I'm just trying to help. You've got a lot on your plate. We need to be prepared for the investors." The explanations made sense. So I didn't think much of it. After all, Rachel was my best friend, and Brightwave's success benefited both of us. Or so I thought. At the same time, Daniel started acting differently too. He became distant. Not enough for me to panic, just enough for me to notice. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at his phone and quickly locking the screen when I walked into the room. Other times, he would disappear for hours and claim he was meeting friends. Whenever I questioned him, he smiled and reassured me. "You're overthinking." Maybe I was. The company was growing rapidly. The investor negotiations were stressful. I told myself that was the reason I felt uneasy. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late at the office preparing documents for an investor presentation. Most of the staff had already gone home. The building was quiet. Around 9:30 p.m., I realized I had forgotten an important contract in Rachel's office. I walked down the hallway and noticed the light under her door. That surprised me. Rachel had told me she was leaving hours ago. As I got closer, I heard voices. A man's voice. Daniel's voice. I froze. At first, I smiled. Maybe he had stopped by to surprise me. Maybe they were discussing something related to the company. But then I heard Rachel laughing. Not the kind of laugh people use in business meetings. The kind of laugh people use when they're comfortable, intimate, familiar. I stood outside the door for several seconds. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then I heard Daniel speak. "We have to be careful." The smile disappeared from my face. Rachel answered quietly, "I know." My stomach tightened. I should have opened the door. I should have walked in immediately. Instead, I stood there trying to convince myself there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. A few moments later, footsteps approached the door. I quickly moved away before they could see me. I watched from around the corner as Rachel and Daniel exited together. They were smiling, talking, standing much closer than they should have been. But before I could process what I was seeing, they walked toward the elevator. Neither of them noticed me. I waited until they disappeared before returning to my office. The entire drive home felt unreal. My mind kept replaying the scene. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe there was another explanation. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. Then, Daniel walked through the front door an hour later. "Long night?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just catching up with some friends." The lie came so easily, so naturally. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look guilty. He simply kissed my forehead and walked into the kitchen. And that was the moment fear truly settled into my chest, because for the first time, I wasn't questioning what I had seen. I was questioning the people I trusted most. Over the next few weeks, the feeling only grew stronger. Rachel and Daniel seemed to be everywhere together. Whenever I called Rachel, Daniel somehow already knew what we'd discussed. Private company conversations somehow reached people outside the business. Important documents were being moved without my approval. Small decisions were being made behind my back. Every piece on its own seemed insignificant, but together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. One evening, I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the city lights. The investor deal was only weeks away, the biggest opportunity of my life. Yet instead of feeling excited, I felt anxious, a feeling I couldn't explain, a feeling I couldn't shake. I remember looking at my reflection in the glass and asking myself a question. What if the people closest to me aren't who I think they are? I wish I had trusted that instinct, because while I was still searching for answers, Rachel and Daniel were already making their move. And soon, they wouldn't just steal my trust. They were going to steal everything I had spent years building. People often say that the truth sets you free. They're wrong. Sometimes the truth destroys you first. A week before the investor deal was supposed to close, I received a call that changed my life. It was from one of the investors. At first, I thought it was good news. I expected another discussion about expansion plans. Instead, The man sounded nervous. "Olivia, we need to talk." The moment he said those words, my stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" There was a long pause. "We've received some concerning information." I frowned. "What information?" "Documents suggesting financial irregularities within Brightwave." I nearly laughed. There must be some mistake. I hope so. But the concern in his voice told me otherwise. Within hours, every investor meeting had been postponed. The deal I'd spent years working toward was suddenly hanging by a thread. I rushed back to the office. My heart was pounding the entire drive. When I arrived, Rachel was already there, waiting, almost as if she knew I was coming. "We have a problem," I said. She nodded slowly. "I know." The calmness in her voice felt strange, too calm, almost rehearsed. I spent the next several days trying to figure out what had happened. Then the nightmare truly began. Someone had altered financial reports. Funds appeared to have been moved between accounts. Unauthorized transactions had been recorded. The evidence pointed directly at me. The founder, the CEO, the person responsible for everything. Me. I couldn't understand it. I knew I hadn't done any of it, but somehow the record said otherwise, and the more I investigated, the worse things became. Then came the emergency board meeting. The meeting where my life fell apart. I walked into the conference room expecting support. Instead, I found cold faces staring back at me. Board members, investors, lawyers, Rachel. Everyone looked at me differently, like I was a stranger, like I was guilty. I sat down and tried to explain. There has to be some kind of mistake. Nobody responded. The chairman slid a folder across the table. Inside were dozens of documents, every one of them damaging, every one of them apparently connected to me. I felt physically sick. I didn't do this. Rachel lowered her eyes. The performance was perfect, almost Oscar-worthy. "I wanted to believe that too," she said quietly. I stared at her. "What?" She sighed heavily. "As your friend, I tried to defend you." Friend. The word felt like poison. But the evidence is overwhelming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own best friend was helping bury me. The room erupted into discussion. Lawyers spoke, board members argued, investors demanded action. By the end of the meeting, the decision had been made. I was being removed as CEO. Effective immediately. Just like that. The company I built from my apartment. The company I sacrificed years of my life for. The company that carried my blood, sweat, and tears. Gone. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box filled with personal belongings, a coffee mug, family photos, a notebook full of ideas. The entire life I'd built reduced to a box. Employees avoided eye contact as I passed. Some looked sympathetic, others looked suspicious, as if they believed the accusations. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, unable to start the engine, unable to think, unable to breathe. And somehow, things got worse. 3 days later, I came home early. I had spent the morning speaking with lawyers who seemed more interested in protecting themselves than helping me. All I wanted was to see Daniel. I needed support. I needed someone on my side. When I opened the front door, I immediately noticed something strange. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw it. Half of Daniel's belongings were missing. My chest tightened. I walked into the bedroom. The closet was half empty. His suitcase was gone. And sitting on the bed was a letter. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was short, cold, brutal. "Olivia, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Things haven't been right between us for a long time. I think it's best if we move on separately. Please don't contact me." That was it. 4 years together, reduced to a few sentences. I read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th, trying to understand how everything had collapsed so quickly. But deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. The answer arrived 2 weeks later. A friend sent me a photo. One photo. That was all it took. The image showed Daniel standing on a beach, his arm wrapped around Rachel, both of them smiling, both of them looking happier than I'd ever seen. I stared at the picture until my vision blurred. Then came another photo, and another, and another. Dinner dates, weekend trips, parties, events. They weren't newly together. They'd been together for months, maybe longer. The realization hit me like a truck. While I was building my company, they were building a relationship. While I was planning my wedding, they were planning my replacement. I lost control. For the first time in my life, I completely broke down. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I screamed. I threw things. I cursed both of their names. Everything hurt. The company, the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. But more than anything, it was the realization that the two people I trusted most had been working together all along. And as I sat alone on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the ruins of my life, I made a promise that would shape everything that came next. I would uncover the truth. I would prove what they had done. And one day, Rachel and Daniel would regret ever crossing me. Or the first few months after losing everything, I didn't know who I was anymore. That might sound dramatic, but it's the truth. When you spend years building something, you don't realize how much of your identity becomes attached to it. Brightwave wasn't just a company. It was my dream. My proof that all the late nights, sacrifices, and moments of doubt were worth it. And Rachel didn't just steal a business from me. She stole the future I thought I was going to have. Daniel didn't just leave me. He destroyed the image I had of love. For weeks, I barely left my apartment. I ignored calls. I avoided friends. I couldn't stand hearing people ask, "How are you doing?" Because the truth was, I wasn't doing well. Everyone saw the headlines. Founder removed after financial scandal. Brightwave CEO accused of mismanagement. People online had opinions about me. People who didn't know me. People who didn't know the years I spent building that company. They believed the story Rachel and Daniel created. And that was the part that hurt the most. Not losing everything. Being blamed for it. One night, I was sitting on my couch scrolling through my old emails when I found something that changed everything. It was an email from 6 months earlier. An unusual login notification. At the time, I ignored it. I was too busy, too trusting. But now, I looked closer. The login came from a device I didn't recognize. And the location? Rachel's apartment building? My heart started racing. I spent the entire night going through old records. I checked documents, messages, access logs, financial reports. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle started coming together. Rachel hadn't suddenly betrayed me. She had been preparing. She had been studying the company, learning the systems, watching everything, waiting for the perfect moment. And Daniel? He wasn't just the man who left me. He was involved too. I found messages between them discussing company decisions. They had been planning around me for months. The betrayal wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. I remember staring at my computer screen that night with tears in my eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. For the first time since everything happened, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Determination. I knew I couldn't fight them emotionally. Rachel had already proven she was willing to manipulate people. Daniel had already proven he could lie without hesitation. If I wanted justice, I needed to be smarter. So I made a decision. I disappeared. Not literally, but from their world. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped asking mutual friends about them. I stopped trying to prove my innocence to people who had already decided I was guilty. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I started small, very small. I took consulting jobs. I helped struggling businesses fix their marketing problems. I worked from coffee shops. I answered emails from a second-hand laptop. It felt humiliating at first, going from running a company with dozens of employees to sitting alone in the corner of a cafe. But something strange happened. I started enjoying it because for the first time in years, I wasn't building something for investors. I wasn't trying to impress a board. I wasn't surrounded by people pretending to support me. I was building something because I believed in myself. Slowly, things changed. One client became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became hundreds. The same skills that built Brightwave were still inside me. Rachel stole my company, but she couldn't steal my knowledge. She couldn't steal my ambition. She couldn't steal my ability to create. 2 years passed, then 3, and during those 3 years, everyone thought I had disappeared. Rachel became the face of Brightwave. She gave interviews. She appeared at business events. She talked about taking the company to the next level. Every time I saw her name online, I felt anger, but I never acted. Not yet, because revenge isn't about reacting. It's about waiting until the moment matters, and while Rachel was celebrating her victory, I was quietly building something much bigger. My new company, Novarise Solutions, grew faster than I ever expected. We started working with major brands. We hired talented people. Investors who once ignored me were now calling me. The same industry that had turned its back on me started asking for meetings. Then one morning, I received an email that made me smile for the first time in years. It was from an investor. The subject line said, "Acquisition opportunity." They wanted to discuss buying my company, a company that had started with nothing, a company that existed because I refused to stay broken. I sat back in my chair and looked out the window. For years, Rachel and Daniel believed they had destroyed me. They believed they had taken my future. But they made one mistake. They underestimated me. And now, I finally had the power to take back what was mine. Not by begging, not by exposing myself too early, but by becoming someone they could no longer ignore. I opened my laptop. I typed one name into the search bar. Brightwave Media. The company was still successful, but something had changed. The numbers weren't as strong as they used to be. Employees were leaving, investors were nervous, and there were rumors about financial problems. I smiled because for the first time in 3 years, I knew it was time to come back. For 3 years, Rachel and Daniel lived in a world where they believed they had won. They had everything they wanted. The company, the money, the reputation, the life they stole from me. And the most frustrating part? They thought I was gone forever. They thought the woman they destroyed had disappeared. They were wrong. I didn't disappear. I evolved. By the time I returned to the business world, Novarise Solutions had become something bigger than I ever imagined. The company that started with me, working alone in a coffee shop now, had offices, employees, and investors who believed in my vision. But unlike Brightwave, I built Novarise differently. I didn't build it around ego. I didn't build it around appearances. I built it around loyalty. The first thing I did when Novarise became successful was hire people who valued trust, because I knew exactly what happened when the wrong people were given power. I knew what betrayal looked like, and I would never allow it to happen again. One morning, I walked into a meeting with my executive team. On the screen behind me was a presentation. The title was simple: The Future of Novarise. We have reached a point where we have 2 choices, I said. We can continue growing independently, or we can acquire a company that has lost its direction. Everyone looked at me. They knew exactly which company I was talking about. Brightwave. A few months earlier, I had quietly started buying small amounts of Brightwave's shares through investment groups. I didn't make it obvious. I didn't want attention. I wanted information. And what I discovered shocked even me. The company Rachel stole from me was falling apart. The same people who once praised her were now questioning her decisions. Clients were leaving. Employees were frustrated. Investors were losing confidence. Rachel had taken the company but never understood what made it successful. She thought the success came from the name, the office, the money, the reputation. She never understood that the real value was the person who built it. Me. I continued watching from a distance. Then, one evening, I saw something online. A photo from a business event. Rachel and Daniel were standing together, smiling for cameras. The caption read, "Brightwave's power couple celebrates another year of success." I stared at the picture. 3 years ago, seeing that would have destroyed me. But this time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. They were still living in the fantasy that they created. They didn't know the woman they betrayed was closer than ever. A week later, I received an invitation. A business conference where the biggest companies in the industry would gather. Brightwave was one of the keynote sponsors. And Novarise had been invited as a rising competitor. I knew what that meant. The universe had placed us in the same room again. The night before the event, I stood in front of my mirror. For a moment, I remembered the woman I used to be. The woman who trusted too easily. The woman who believed love and friendship could never turn into betrayal. She was still part of me. But she was no longer in control. The next morning, I walked into the conference wearing a black suit. The room was filled with executives, investors, and media. People who had once looked at me with suspicion. People who believed Rachel's version of the story. Then, I heard a familiar voice. "Olivia?" I turned around. Rachel was standing behind me. For a second, her expression was impossible to read. Shock, fear, confusion. She looked at me like she had seen a ghost. "You're here?" I smiled politely. "Of course I'm here." Her eyes moved around the room. "You're with Novarise?" I nodded. The confidence disappeared from her face, because she finally understood. I wasn't the woman she left behind. I wasn't the woman carrying a cardboard box out of Brightwave. I was her competition. And for the first time in 3 years, Rachel looked nervous. Then Daniel appeared beside her. The moment he saw me, his face changed. The confident smile disappeared. The man who had walked away without looking back suddenly looked uncertain. "Olivia." I looked at him, the man I once planned to marry, the man who had chosen my best friend over me. "Daniel." The silence between us said everything. Neither of them knew what to say, because they expected anger. They expected confrontation. They expected me to explode. But I didn't. I simply smiled, and that seemed to bother them more. Rachel finally spoke. "You've done well for yourself." I looked at her. "Thank you." She waited. Maybe she expected me to mention the past. Maybe she expected revenge. But I walked away, because the truth was, I didn't need to convince them that I had won. Soon, they would find out. The next morning, the business world woke up to unexpected news. Novarise Solutions had announced a major acquisition. The company being acquired? Brightwave Media. The company Rachel stole from me. The company she thought she owned forever. When Rachel saw the announcement, she didn't believe it. When Daniel saw it, he knew exactly what it meant. The woman they betrayed had returned. And this time, I wasn't coming back to take revenge. I was coming back to take everything they thought they had taken from me. The morning after the acquisition announcement, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets, investors, former employees. People who had ignored my calls 3 years earlier were suddenly desperate to speak with me. But I ignored them all. For years, I had dreamed about this moment, the moment when everyone would finally see the truth. But when it arrived, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. I already knew who I was. The only people who needed to know the truth were Rachel and Daniel, and they were about to learn everything. The acquisition process took several weeks. During that time, I stayed quiet. I let the lawyers do their work. I let the investigators uncover what had been hidden. Because while Rachel was busy trying to save her reputation, I was uncovering every secret she had buried. And there were many. The first discovery came from the company's financial records. Millions of dollars had been moved through accounts connected to businesses owned by people close to Rachel. At first, it looked like complicated transactions. But when investigators followed the money, the pattern became clear. Rachel hadn't just helped frame me. She had been stealing from Brightwave long before she pushed me out. The documents I was accused of creating, they were part of her plan. She had created evidence against me to hide what she had been doing herself. I sat in my office reading the final report. For years, I had wondered how someone I loved could betray me so easily. Now I understood. It wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because Rachel was willing to destroy anyone standing between her and what she wanted, including me. The next person to fall apart was Daniel. Unlike Rachel, Daniel wasn't a mastermind. He was selfish. He wanted the lifestyle, the money, the success. He wanted to be next to someone powerful. And when he thought Rachel could give him everything I had built, he chose her. But now that Brightwave was collapsing, he started looking for someone to blame. And of course, that person was Rachel. I found out they had started arguing constantly. The same relationship they had built through lies was now being destroyed by the same thing: lies. One evening, I received a message from Daniel. I stared at his name on my screen for a long time. A part of me wanted to ignore it. A part of me wanted to hear him explain himself. So I agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet restaurant. For the first time in years, I saw him clearly. Not as the man I loved, not as my fiancé, just as the person who betrayed me. "You look different," he said. I smiled slightly. "So do you." He looked down. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I repeated. He swallowed. "I made mistakes." I laughed quietly. Mistakes are forgetting someone's birthday. Mistakes are saying the wrong thing during an argument. I looked directly at him. "What you did was a choice." He didn't respond, because he knew I was right. "I loved you," I continued, "and you used that." His eyes dropped. I thought I was making the right decision. The right decision? I shook my head. "No, you made the easiest decision." He looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means you chose the person who already had power instead of standing beside the person who was struggling." The silence between us was heavy. Then he said something I never expected. "I regret it." Those words would have destroyed me 3 years ago, but now they meant nothing, because regret doesn't undo betrayal. "I hope you learn from it," I said. Then I stood up, and I left. For the first time, walking away from Daniel didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. But the real confrontation was still coming. Rachel, she wasn't ready to lose everything. A few days later, she requested an emergency meeting, the same boardroom where she helped remove me, the same room where everyone looked at me like I was guilty. I walked inside. Rachel was sitting at the table. She looked exhausted, not the confident woman from the interviews, not the woman who stole my company, just someone who finally realized her plan had failed. "You planned this," she said. I sat down calmly. "Planned what?" "All of this." I looked around the room. "The acquisition?" She nodded. "The investigation." Another nod. "The fact that everyone is finding out the truth." I smiled. "No, Rachel." I placed the evidence folder on the table. "You did that yourself." Her face changed. I opened the folder. Every document, every transaction, every conversation. Her confidence disappeared. "You don't understand what happened." I looked at her. "No, I understand perfectly." I leaned forward. "You thought you could take my company because you knew the system. You thought you could take my reputation because people would believe you. You thought you could take my future because I would never recover." I paused. "But you made one mistake." Rachel stared at me. "What?" "You forgot who built Brightwave in the first place." The room became silent. For the first time, Rachel looked afraid. Not because I was angry, because she finally understood. She had never defeated me. She had only delayed me. The investigation was about to become public. The evidence was going to be released, and the world was about to learn the truth. Rachel and Daniel didn't steal my life. they only gave me a reason to build an even better one. And now, it was their turn to lose everything. The day the truth came out, I woke up earlier than usual. For years, I imagined what this moment would feel like. I imagined anger. I imagined satisfaction. I imagined finally seeing Rachel and Daniel get what they deserved. But when I looked out of my apartment window that morning, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm because the truth had finally done what I couldn't do. It had spoken for itself. By 8 a.m., every major business publication was reporting the same story. Former Brightwave founder cleared as evidence reveals internal fraud. The article explained everything: the manipulated documents, the hidden transactions, the false accusations, the betrayal. For 3 years, people had believed I destroyed my own company. Now they knew the truth. I wasn't a fraud. I was the person who had been betrayed. My phone exploded with messages. Former employees apologized. Old business partners reached out. People who once judged me admitted they were wrong, but I didn't celebrate. Because while everyone else was discovering the truth, I had already known it for years. The real victory wasn't proving them wrong. The real victory was becoming someone who no longer needed their approval. Later that afternoon, I arrived at Brightwave's headquarters for the final board meeting. The same building where I'd once walked out carrying a cardboard box. The same building where I thought my life had ended, but this time I walked through those doors differently. Employees stood quietly as I entered. Some looked embarrassed, some looked emotional. Many remembered the day I left. One former employee approached me. "Olivia." I stopped. She looked nervous. "I should have believed you." I gave her a small smile. "Thank you for saying that." She looked down. "We all made a mistake." I shook my head gently. Some mistakes are easier to fix than others. Then I continued walking. Inside the boardroom, everyone was waiting. Investors, lawyers, executives. And at the end of the table sat Rachel. She looked nothing like the woman who had taken my place. The confidence was gone. The expensive smile was gone. The person sitting there looked defeated. The chairman stood up. "Olivia, thank you for joining us." I sat down. The meeting began. The evidence was presented. Every lie Rachel had created was exposed. Every decision she made to protect herself was revealed. She tried to defend herself. "I never intended for things to go this far." I looked at her. "But they did." She looked frustrated. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect the company." I almost laughed. "Protect the company?" I looked around the room. "You didn't protect this company. You protected yourself." Silence, because everyone knew it was true. Rachel had spent years trying to become me. But she never understood what made me successful. It wasn't the title, it wasn't the money, it wasn't the attention, it was trust. And she destroyed the one thing a leader needs most. The board made their decision. Rachel was removed from her position. The legal consequences would follow. The company she had stolen was no longer hers. And then came the final moment. The chairman turned to me. "Olivia, as the original founder and now majority shareholder, the board would like to offer you the position of CEO again." 3 years ago, that sentence would have meant everything. But I had changed. I looked around the room, the place where I had lost everything. Then I smiled. "I appreciate the offer." Everyone waited, but I don't want to go back. The room became quiet. The chairman looked surprised. "You don't?" I shook my head. "No." I stood up, because I spent too much time trying to get back what I lost. I looked around one final time, then I realized I'd already built something better. That night, I met Rachel one last time. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted closure. She was sitting alone outside the building. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Do you hate me?" I thought about it, the sleepless nights, the betrayal, the pain, the years I spent rebuilding. Then I answered honestly, "No, She looked surprised. I don't hate you. I paused, but I will never trust you again. A tear rolled down her face. I really thought I won. I nodded. I know. I looked toward the city lights. But winning isn't taking something from someone else. I turned back to her. Winning is building something they can never take away. And that was the last time I ever spoke to Rachel. As for Daniel, I heard he tried to start over, but the reputation he built on lies followed him everywhere. People remembered what he did, and eventually, he understood what I had learned years earlier. The choices you make when nobody is watching eventually become the story everyone knows. A year later, Novarise became one of the most respected companies in the industry. I became known not as the woman who lost Brightwave, but as the woman who rebuilt herself after losing everything. Looking back, I used to think Rachel and Daniel ruined my life. I was wrong. They ended one chapter, a painful chapter, a chapter filled with betrayal and heartbreak, but they also forced me to discover something I never knew about myself. I could survive anything. They thought they destroyed me. They thought they stole my future. But all they really did was give me the motivation to create an even better one.